The night had settled over Tulsa with a heat that pressed against the skin, thick and unrelenting. Inside her small Kendall Whittier bungalow, 5-year-old Rebecca Miller was supposed to be finishing her sketches for a freelance client, lost in her world of lines, shapes, and color. The faint strains of a 90 seconds alternative rock playlist wove through the rooms, and the lingering scent of patchouli mixed with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Everything was ordinary. Everything was familiar, until it wasn't. Danica Wells, Rebecca's roommate and closest friend, had gone to bed around 11:30 p.m., expecting the usual rhythm of the night. Rebecca promised she would finish one last design and then join her. But when morning came, the bungalow carried an unbearable, suffocating quiet. The front door was unlocked, something Rebecca never allowed. The pencil she had been using rested perfectly on the kitchen table, poised mid-thought. Her beloved Dalmatian, Pippin, whined quietly by the back door. A living alarm that something had gone horribly wrong. No signs of forced entry. No valuables missing. No overturned furniture. Everything looked untouched, as though Rebecca had simply vanished into thin air. Yet her absence was deafening. Each detail, the stillness, the perfect placement of her pencil, the anxious whimpers of her dog hinted at a reality far crueler than any ordinary disappearance. Have you ever felt a sense something was just wrong? Stay with me before we dive into this shocking and heartbreaking story. If you enjoy powerful cold case stories like this, you may want to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, and let us know the country you're watching from in the comments. We truly love reading them. The evening had begun like any other, but its ordinary rhythm was about to be shattered. Rebecca leaned over her sketches, her pencil gliding across the page as she poured her energy into each design. The sunflower tattoo on her shoulder caught the soft lamplight, a quiet emblem of the bright, uncontainable spirit that defined her. She was alive with ideas, dreams, and an unshakable drive, yet none of it would matter come morning. Danica had tidied her own workspace and quietly said goodnight, expecting Rebecca to finish her final sketch and join her shortly. Their last conversation had been lighthearted, full of shared jokes about deadlines and coffee stains. That small, everyday farewell became an unbearable anchor of loss. In those moments, no one could know that the ordinary comfort of routine would fracture into a mystery that would linger for decades. The bungalow seemed to hold its breath. The half-finished sketches, the pencil left precisely where it had fallen, the faint scent of patchouli in the air, all were small, haunting remnants of a life paused. Nothing had been disturbed. No one had barged in, and yet, the house felt violated. Every object, left in place, screamed at the absence of its owner, the injustice of a life interrupted. As the night grew deeper, the contrast between normalcy and the looming disappearance became almost unbearable. Rebecca's creativity, her laughter, her plans all paused in an instant, leaving a vacuum that felt heavy with anger and grief. For viewers now, the question is impossible to ignore. How could someone so full of life simply vanish, leaving everything behind? The shadows of that night stretched long, carrying with them the first hints of fear, frustration, and helplessness. Every detail, every untouched item, became a clue no one yet understood. And for those watching, the tension tightens, the emotional weight pressing like the thick Oklahoma summer air, leaving the heart pounding with dread and anticipation. Morning broke over the bungalow, indifferent to the devastation it would reveal. Danica stirred, expecting to see Rebecca as she always did, alive with energy and ready to face the day. Instead, she was met with a silence that cut deeper than any scream. Rebecca was gone. Every heartbeat in Danica's chest seemed to slam against the walls of the empty house, pounding with panic, disbelief, and a burning, helpless rage. The front door was unlocked, a violation that should have sent alarms ringing through the city. The pencil lay still, poised on the open sketchpad as though time itself had frozen in protest. Pippin's whines echoed across the rooms, each sound a desperate reminder that someone had stolen more than just a presence. They had stolen safety, trust, and peace. Danica's eyes darted around the bungalow, searching for a clue, any sign, Anything that could explain the impossible. There was none. No struggle. No missing belongings. No note. Just the oppressive, suffocating absence of Rebecca, leaving an ache that twisted through the heart and refused to relent. And then her gaze fell on the tiny smudge of red clay on the hallway floor. Out of place. Unassuming, but now the first whisper of something hidden, something overlooked, something that might hold the answer. It was a detail small enough to be ignored, yet it carried the weight of a truth too painful to comprehend. The world outside continued, unaware, while inside the bungalow, a life had been ripped from its center. Danica's hands trembled as the reality sank in. Anger, fear, and grief collided, forming a storm that would not calm for decades. Viewers watching now, can you feel the suffocating weight of those first moments? The sudden, jarring absence of someone you love? The impossibility of the situation? The powerless rage? What would you do if someone vanished from your home without a trace? Comment below, we want to hear your thoughts. Every sound, every object left in place, became a question, a hint, a thread that demanded to be followed. And while that morning seemed quiet, it was only the beginning. A story of obsession, deception, and betrayal was already unfolding, silent, patient, waiting for someone to notice. Detective Calvin Thorne stepped into the bungalow with a careful, measured pace. The air was thick with the summer humidity, carrying the lingering scent of patchouli and coffee. But what immediately struck him was the absence, the void, where a young woman's presence should have been. Every room was still, unnervingly quiet, as if the house itself held its breath. He noticed the pencil resting on the open sketchpad first. Its tip paused mid-line. Nothing around it had been disturbed. Chairs stood neatly at the table. Cups and mugs remained where they had been placed the night before, and the front door, unlocked, seemed to mock the absence of its owner. Even Pippin, Rebecca's Dalmatian, pressed against the back door with anxious whimpers, offered a silent, uneasy alarm. Thorne's trained eyes swept the bungalow, noting each detail that seemed trivial to anyone else. A faint smudge of red clay caught his attention, small, almost dismissible, yet completely out of place on the polished wood floor. He crouched, examining it carefully. Red clay wasn't unusual in Oklahoma, but this particular shade and composition was uncommon, typically found along isolated creek beds outside the city. A clue, minute but deliberate, that hinted at a story just beyond reach. Nothing about the bungalow suggested theft or forced entry. Every object stood in order, every room bore no signs of struggle. Yet Rebecca Miller had vanished. The normal rhythm of her life had been torn apart in silence, leaving Detective Thorne to face a puzzle that refused to yield its secrets. Detective Thorne crouched over the red clay smudge, letting his fingers hover above it without disturbing a single particle. The material was ordinary enough to escape notice, yet its location screamed that someone had tracked it from outside into the house. He traced the thought quietly. If it had come from a creek bed, someone had been there recently, possibly carrying Rebecca. The thought tightened his chest. He examined the rest of the bungalow again, searching for anything else that might have been left behind. There was nothing. No broken locks. No signs of forced entry. No scattered belongings. Rebecca's purse, her car keys, even her half-finished sketches remained untouched. The house spoke of calm, order, normalcy, and yet, she was gone. The contrast made the disappearance impossible, infuriatingly so. Thorne's mind raced, considering every possible explanation. Could she have left voluntarily? It seemed unlikely. The untouched possessions and Pippin's anxious behavior argued otherwise. Each unanswered question added weight to the room. The red clay, small as it was, became a thread to follow a single piece of a puzzle that refused to fit together neatly. He moved to the hallway, eyes scanning every inch of polished wood. The smudge was the only irregularity, but Thorne knew better than to dismiss it. The smallest clue could hold the most explosive answers. The bungalow, once familiar and comforting, now carried a heaviness that pressed against him, a sense of injustice, of a life stolen without warning, without explanation. What would you have done in Danica's shoes? Comment below. Detective Thorne stepped back, surveying the bungalow as if it held the answers in its walls. Every item, every surface, every detail seemed untouched. Chairs were aligned, sketches lay open, the pencil still poised on the page. Yet Rebecca Miller was gone. The very idea of a person disappearing so completely, leaving nothing but the faintest trace of red clay, tightened a knot of frustration and disbelief in his chest. He replayed the last known moments, piecing together what little he knew. Danica's goodbye. Rebecca promising one last sketch. The quiet that should have been ordinary, all now part of an impossible puzzle. No footprints, no struggle, no ransom note, no message, nothing. It was as if the life inside the bungalow had been paused, stolen mid-motion, leaving a vacuum heavy with anger and grief. Thorne's mind refused to settle. Each step, each glance, each observation seemed to confirm the unthinkable. Rebecca hadn't walked out. She had been taken, yet there were no signs of confrontation, no indications of force. The bungalow whispered of a life interrupted, a violation both silent and complete. The red clay smudge remained the only anomaly, tiny and unassuming, yet screaming for attention. Thorne traced its implications silently, imagining the creek beds, the remote paths outside Tulsa, the quiet desperation that had accompanied the intrusion. Each detail he noted became a question, a loop of suspense that refused to resolve. The impossible nature of Rebecca's disappearance was now undeniable. For anyone watching, the tension is tangible. A vibrant life, stolen in silence, leaving only questions, fear, and anger. Detective Thorne lingered in the bungalow, eyes scanning every corner one final time. The silence pressed against him, heavier with each passing moment. The red clay smudge, the untouched sketches, the pencil frozen midline, they were fragments of a story he couldn't yet read. Every detail teased a pattern, yet the answers remained just out of reach. How could someone vanish so completely, leaving only whispers of their presence? The impossible nature of the disappearance gnawed at him, fueling a quiet anger and determination that refused to waver. Thorne's mind circled possibilities, imagining the paths, the moments, the small missteps that could hold the key. Each unanswered question became a tension loop, a silent invitation to keep searching, keep thinking, keep pushing against the void. The house, once warm and familiar, now seemed like a puzzle built to frustrate, to haunt. For those watching, the unease lingers. Every calm detail is a clue, every untouched object a question. The case was far from over, and while answers remained distant, the first threads of truth had begun to stir, waiting for the detective who refused to let the story rest. Harry Beckett carried himself with a calm confidence that drew people in. At 28, he was a high school history teacher, respected by students and colleagues alike, a familiar face in Tulsa's tight-knit community. His charm was effortless, his smile genuine, or at least, that's what everyone believed. Friends described him as dependable, articulate, and quietly thoughtful. To the world, he was the boyfriend everyone expected Rebecca Miller to have. Supportive, attentive, seemingly harmless. Yet, within the walls of his apartment, there was another side. Those closest to him noticed small flashes of possessiveness, moments where his patience thinned, and subtle tensions surfaced over Rebecca's independence. He had a quiet intensity that didn't always reveal itself openly, but lingered beneath every interaction, shaping his responses, his expectations, and, ultimately, the dynamic of their relationship. Rebecca, vibrant and fiercely independent, was often the one setting the pace, pushing for her dreams and asserting her choices. Her creativity and energy contrasted sharply with Harry's controlled demeanor, creating friction that was never dramatic in public, yet noticeable to those who observed them closely. Arguments about commitment and boundaries had become more frequent, small disputes that left emotional marks neither could fully articulate. As the narrator, it's important to note, Harry's calm exterior made suspicion difficult to place. He could smile, speak with warmth, and perform empathy effortlessly. But the contrast between that outward composure and the subtle undercurrents of possessiveness created a tension that no one could ignore entirely. For viewers, the question becomes immediate. Can someone so charming, so collected, really be connected to the disappearance? Or is there more to the story, hidden behind a carefully maintained facade? As news of Rebecca Miller's disappearance spread, the media descended with relentless intensity. Candlelight vigils were organized. Reporters hounded the bungalow, and television cameras captured every tear, every glance, every unanswered question. The public's fascination grew, feeding a narrative that demanded clarity, justice, and, most of all, someone to blame. Detective Thorne felt the weight of this scrutiny acutely. Every decision, every interview, every action of the investigation was under the microscope. The focus quickly narrowed to Harry Beckett. His calm demeanor, once a sign of composure, now became a point of suspicion. The police were caught in a dangerous loop. The more they observed him, the more the public speculated, and the more pressure mounted to prove his guilt or innocence. Harry's every move was scrutinized. Friends and neighbors recounted the arguments. Small tensions that might have seemed trivial on any other day now amplified into potential motives. He appeared at vigils, offered tearful statements to the press, and maintained a carefully measured grief that left some questioning its authenticity. For the police, it was a puzzle. Was this the performance of a man hiding something, or simply a person enduring unbearable loss under unrelenting public attention? Community debate raged. Opinions divided sharply. Some argued Harry was clearly implicated. Others refused to believe the likable, respected teacher could be involved. And through it all, the pressure on Detective Thorne grew, forcing him to balance evidence with perception, suspicion with fairness, and intuition with procedure. For viewers watching, the tension is immediate. The obvious suspect, the calm, charming boyfriend, is under scrutiny. Could his composure conceal something darker, or is it simply the facade of a man trapped in tragedy? Detective Thorne arrived at Harry Beckett's apartment, expecting signs of disorder, tension, maybe even evidence that could link him to Rebecca's disappearance. Instead, he was met with an unnerving calm. Every surface was spotless, every book perfectly aligned, and not a trace of chaos anywhere. The apartment reflected a life carefully maintained, orderly to the smallest detail, a stark contrast to the emotional storm brewing outside its walls. Harry moved through the space with effortless ease, showing Thorne around with a polite, measured tone. There was no defensive posture, no hesitation, no sign of guilt, or at least none that could be seen. Phone records were available, placed neatly in folders, and while no one could independently corroborate his alibi, the documentation made him appear consistent, composed, and plausible. The detective's frustration grew. The neatness itself became almost maddening. A perfect mask, concealing what might lie underneath. Every item, every room, seemed calculated to present normalcy. Clothing folded neatly in drawers, dishes washed and stacked, the apartment's minimalistic order a testament to control. Thorne noted it all, recognizing the subtle tension between appearance and suspicion. This was a man aware of perception, aware of scrutiny, and perhaps aware of how far a carefully curated image could protect him. For viewers, this scene creates a difficult question. Can such composure belong to someone connected to a disappearance? Or is it simply the discipline of a calm, grieving man? The red herrings are clear. The apartment offers nothing to confirm wrongdoing, yet the detective, the media, and the community cannot ignore the suspicion it raises. Every neat detail is both reassurance and challenge, forcing Thorne to dig deeper, beyond what is obvious. Could someone so calm really hide such a secret? Think carefully. Despite the outward calm of Harry Beckett, whispers of suspicion circulated quietly among the police. Detective Thorne couldn't shake the tension that lingered in Harry's measured responses, the controlled grief, and the ease with which he presented his alibi. Every observation seemed to reinforce a troubling paradox. A man so composed could either be entirely innocent or exceptionally deceptive. The community's chatter added fuel to the fire. Some insisted Harry must be guilty. The arguments, the emotional distance, the unexplained moments. Others defended him vigorously, citing his reputation, the empathy he showed publicly, and the apparent lack of any direct evidence. This divide created a pressure cooker of speculation, where opinion and fact collided violently, leaving truth obscured beneath layers of assumption. In the precinct, tension simmered. Officers exchanged glances, sharing unspoken thoughts about Harry, yet no concrete proof emerged. The investigation teetered between instinct and uncertainty, and the detective knew that tunnel vision could lead them astray. Meanwhile, the media coverage intensified, capturing every word, every gesture, amplifying the stakes and feeding the sense of an unresolved moral puzzle. For the audience, the suspense deepens. A likable, respected man, the presumed suspect, occupies a space between innocence and hidden culpability. Every viewer is invited to judge, to question, to engage. Could someone so calm really hide such a secret? Think carefully. The lines between truth and assumption blur, leaving only tension, doubt, and anticipation for what the next revelation will bring. This delicate balance of suspicion and debate ensures the story stays alive. The questions linger, and the viewers are pulled deeper into the complex web surrounding Rebecca's disappearance. Detective Calvin Thorne returned to Rebecca's bungalow more times than he could count, each visit deepening the knot of frustration in his chest. The house had not changed: chairs, neatly aligned, sketches untouched, the pencil still resting where it had been left. And yet, the absence of Rebecca screamed louder with every step. The calmness of the scene made it unbearable, mocking the urgency he felt. He scrutinized every detail repeatedly. The half-finished sketch, Pippin's anxious whines, the faint smudge of red clay near the doorway. Each element was insignificant on its own, but together they formed a pattern only he seemed determined to decipher. Friends and colleagues suggested he move on, that the case had gone cold. Thorne refused. The missing artist, the unanswered questions, and the quiet injustice gnawed at him daily. Sleep offered little reprieve. In his mind, he retraced the night of August 24th countless times, examining what was known, testing every theory, and dismissing the improbable. The world outside the bungalow moved on, but for Thorne, time had frozen. Each day without progress sharpened his resolve, transforming frustration into an obsession that demanded answers. For viewers, the tension is palpable. A detective driven not by ego, but by a relentless need for justice. Thorne's fixation is both admirable and exhausting, a mirror to the audience's own desire to see truth unveiled. Every unanswered question, every minor clue, every dead end builds the weight of anticipation, pulling us deeper into the story and the detective's singular mission to find what should not have been lost. The red clay smudge that had first seemed trivial now demanded Thorne's full attention. Lab analysis traced it to a rare, oxidized type of clay, found only near creek beds and remote areas outside Tulsa. It was a tiny breadcrumb, almost laughably small, yet it hinted at movement, a location, a connection that no one else had considered. Thorne imagined the paths, the isolation, the quiet spots where someone could go unnoticed. The clay suggested a place far from city streets and casual observation, a location Rebecca could never have reached on her own. Each step of the investigation reinforced the idea that the answer was not in the apartment, not in the immediate neighborhood, but somewhere further, somewhere hidden in plain sight. Despite its potential, the red clay was a frustrating clue. Without a body, without witnesses, without corroboration, it remained a whisper, a suggestion, not proof. Yet for Thorne, it became a focus, a thread to hold on to in the suffocating uncertainty. He pored over maps, cross-referenced locations, and considered every creek bed and abandoned work site in the vicinity. Each hypothesis felt tantalizingly close, then slipped away, leaving only more questions. For viewers, the trail sparks curiosity, a single, overlooked element pointing toward a larger truth. The tension grows as the detective chases what the public cannot see, highlighting both the patience and the agony required in cold case work. The red clay becomes a symbol of hope, frustration, and anticipation, a subtle promise that answers may come, but not without struggle. Weeks turned into months, and the investigation ground to a frustrating halt. Every lead that had seemed promising dissolved into uncertainty. Witnesses had nothing new to offer. Tips went cold, and the media, once relentless, gradually moved on to fresher stories. The public's attention waned, leaving the disappearance of Rebecca Miller to linger in quiet, painful limbo. Detective Thorne refused to let the case fade into obscurity. He returned to the bungalow, to the red clay, to every half-finished sketch, and every anxious glance from Pippin. Each detail became more precious. As conventional leads failed, frustration built into an obsessive focus. The detective's mind tirelessly mapped connections, revisited statements, and tested every scenario. Yet, the puzzle remained incomplete, with pieces scattered across time, distance, and memory. The contrast between Thorne's determination and the public's forgetfulness created an almost suffocating tension. Neighbors and friends began to speak of Rebecca's disappearance as something long past, a story relegated to local memory rather than active concern. Yet for those still searching, the absence was far from forgotten. It was an open wound, a question mark that refused to be ignored. For viewers, the stagnation heightens engagement. The detective's persistence against silent streets, unanswered questions, and vanished opportunities pulls the audience into the struggle. Each dead end amplifies the anticipation of discovery. Every silent lead a reminder of the patience and persistence required in the face of uncertainty. The tension builds, unanswered, unresolved, leaving viewers waiting, yearning for the breakthrough that has not yet come. The case lingered like a shadow over Tulsa. The red clay hinted at something hidden, yet no answers emerged. Detective Thorne's notes, maps, and sketches lay untouched on his desk, a silent testament to frustration and persistence. The public had begun to forget, moving on to other headlines, while Rebecca's absence remained a quiet, gnawing void for those who remembered. For viewers, the questions hang in the air. Where had she gone? Who was truly responsible? The mystery waits, unresolved, pulling the audience forward, craving the breakthrough that promises to shatter the silence and reveal the truth. If you're still watching at this point, you might as well subscribe so you don't miss the next one. 20 years had passed since Rebecca Miller vanished, but the case had never truly left the minds of those who had searched for her. Detective Ava Coleman, a rising star in cold case forensics, was assigned the review. Unlike those before her, Ava carried no preconceived notions, no tunnel vision shaped by the frenzy of media attention or the biases of initial investigators. Her mind was a clean slate, sharp, analytical, and relentless in its pursuit of truth. Ava's reputation was built on patience and precision. She specialized in revisiting long-forgotten evidence, unearthing details overlooked by the first wave of investigators. To her, a cold case was not a story concluded. It was a challenge, a puzzle waiting for a perspective capable of seeing connections others had missed. Her colleagues admired her ability to balance methodical review with intuition, never allowing frustration or past assumptions to cloud judgment. The Miller file was dusty, worn, and thick with reports that had long gone cold. Ava approached it like a surgeon, separating fact from speculation, noting what had been emphasized and what had been quietly dismissed. Among the pages, she spotted what others had overlooked, a faint detail recorded almost casually: the red clay smudge in Rebecca's bungalow. While years had passed, and the technology of 2001 had its limits, Ava's understanding of modern forensic methods made the overlooked clue suddenly ripe for investigation. Ava's introduction signals a new hope. Here is a detective who can think beyond the confines of prior assumptions, who respects the evidence and refuses to be distracted by appearances or public opinion. Her methodical approach promises discovery, and her unbiased perspective creates tension. Could the answers to a 20-year-old mystery finally emerge under her watch? Ava Coleman's first task was simple in description, yet monumental in implication. She needed to revisit the evidence archived 2 decades earlier. In the dim basement of the Tulsa Police Department, rows of metal shelves groaned under the weight of forgotten files. Dust hung thick in the air, undisturbed for years, as if time itself had agreed to let these cases sleep. Among the boxes, one label caught her eye. Miller, R. Missing person 2001. Inactive. The name carried a weight that immediate attention could not relieve. Ava carefully removed the case file and began to sift through the layers of documentation, statements, sketches, and photographs that once were vital, now faded but not irrelevant. Each page offered fragments of truth and hints of dead ends, chronicling the painstaking work of officers who had chased leads only to find them evaporate. Her trained eyes focused on details that had been overshadowed. A pencil left on the kitchen table, an unlocked door, the small red clay smudge that had puzzled the original investigators. To others, these were minor observations, easily dismissed. To Ava, they were threads that could weave a story, clues that had remained silent for 20 years, waiting for someone to listen. She noted the overlooked elements with care, creating a mental map of what had been explored and, more importantly, what had been ignored. The red clay, in particular, demanded attention. Its presence suggested a trail, a connection to a location previously unconsidered. Ava's fingers traced its recorded position on the diagram of the bungalow, and she felt the first stirrings of anticipation, the subtle excitement of a lead that might finally ignite a breakthrough. For viewers, this moment heightens tension. The cold case, long dormant, is suddenly alive again. The audience begins to share Ava's hope and her meticulous curiosity, sensing that the mystery may be on the verge of unraveling, yet knowing the path forward remains uncertain. The red clay smudge, long overlooked, now demanded Ava Coleman's full attention. Recorded near the front doorway where Rebecca had last been seen, its presence was subtle, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. It was a trace that hinted at movement, a connection to a place beyond the bungalow, a story written in the language of soil and environment. Ava traced its characteristics with precision. The clay came from creek beds and remote areas outside Tulsa, isolated locations few would traverse unnoticed. Its transfer into Rebecca's home suggested contact with a specific, deliberate location. Someone had brought it in, intentionally or not, leaving a whisper of evidence that had gone unrecognized for 2 decades. The detective mapped the possibilities, considering every angle. The clay's origin pointed to sparsely populated areas, locations where no one would casually notice movement. Each theory reinforced a chilling truth. The disappearance had layers, connections that had escaped initial investigation, and small details that had been dismissed, could now illuminate paths previously ignored. Ava's focus narrowed to the intersection of geography and forensic detail. The smudge was more than dirt, it was a silent witness. The bungalow, the pencil, and the clay formed a puzzle, a framework that could guide the investigation beyond old assumptions. Every observation, every pattern, became a vital piece in reconstructing the night Rebecca vanished. The red clay, once trivial, now anchored the investigation. Its presence demanded scrutiny, challenging long-held beliefs, and opening the door to revelations that had waited 20 years. The detective moved with measured precision, aware that the smallest trace could crack a mystery that had confounded the city for decades. Ava Coleman turned her attention to the pencil left on Rebecca's kitchen table. Years earlier, it had been noted but dismissed as insignificant, a tool frozen mid-sketch. Now, armed with modern forensic methods, Ava saw it as a potential source of critical evidence. Low-template DNA and advanced mitochondrial analysis had evolved far beyond what was available in 2001. Even the faintest traces could be extracted, amplified, and matched. The forensic team carefully examined the pencil, focusing on the wooden shaft and graphite surface. A near-microscopic residue was detected: dermal oils, tiny skin cells, and a faint trace of saliva. It was barely detectable, almost invisible to the techniques of 2 decades past. Yet, with the precision of modern analysis, a partial male DNA profile emerged, one that had never been identified. The implications were immediate and staggering. This was a lead that had eluded detection for 20 years. The DNA did not belong to Rebecca or anyone previously considered. It pointed to someone who had left an invisible mark, someone whose presence in the bungalow had been hidden from sight, leaving only a whisper of physical contact. Ava methodically verified the findings, repeating tests to ensure accuracy. The partial profile was robust enough to enter into CODIS, the National Criminal Database. What had once been a cold, silent clue now pulsed with possibility. The discovery transformed the investigation. It was no longer a story of frustration and unanswered questions. The smallest overlooked detail had become the doorway to the truth, waiting to be opened and pursued. The breakthrough was a reminder that even in cases frozen by time, the persistence of careful observation and modern science could illuminate what had been invisible. Every piece of evidence mattered, and this pencil, resting untouched for decades, had just begun to tell its story. A single, faint trace of DNA from a pencil had reopened a case long thought dormant. For 20 years, questions had remained unanswered, files untouched, and clues overlooked. Now, that microscopic fragment carried the weight of revelation, hinting at a presence no one had suspected. The investigation, frozen for decades, was stirring once more. Every detail, every observation, every forgotten trace could be the key to uncovering the truth. And in the quiet of the archive, Ava Coleman understood that the breakthrough she held in her hands might finally expose the person behind Rebecca Miller's disappearance. The pencil, long dismissed as a trivial tool, had become the linchpin of the investigation. Ava Coleman watched the laboratory screens with a mixture of anticipation and cautious hope. Low-template DNA and advanced mitochondrial analysis had transformed the way trace evidence could be evaluated, and every cell extracted from the pencil carried the potential to rewrite the story. Technicians worked with precision, isolating the faintest traces of dermal oils and saliva. For 20 years, these microscopic remnants had been invisible to investigators, their presence overlooked, their importance underestimated. Now, under Ava's direction, the pencil was yielding a profile, a male DNA sequence that had never been identified before. The profile was partial, but significant. It did not belong to Rebecca Miller, nor did it match any of the individuals who had been under suspicion for years. Each base pair of the sequence amplified the mystery, pointing to someone entirely unconsidered, a presence hidden in the background of the original investigation. Ava's pulse quickened. The silent, unassuming pencil had spoken, and its voice was delivering answers that had eluded the city for 2 decades. As the analysis completed, Ava ran the sequence through CODIS, the National Criminal Database. Every second felt suspended, the tension building with each click and calculation. The potential for revelation hung in the air, a sharp, almost tangible anticipation. This small fragment of evidence, unnoticed in 2001, had the power to shatter assumptions, redirect the investigation, and confront the truth long buried in plain sight. The profile, emerging from the simplest of objects, marked the first turning point in the case since Rebecca's disappearance. For Ava, it was the confirmation that even the quietest, most overlooked details could carry the weight of justice waiting to be claimed. The moment Ava Coleman had been waiting for arrived when the CODIS search pinged a match. The partial male DNA profile from the pencil belonged to Elias Vance, a man whose name had never once appeared in the original investigation. Elias, now 50, had lived in Tulsa as a respected firefighter, known for his charity work, his calm demeanor, and his commitment to the community. He was also the older brother of Harry Beckett, the man who had carried the weight of suspicion for 20 years. The revelation was electric. Elias Vance, a figure trusted by neighbors and admired publicly, was now connected directly to the disappearance of Rebecca Miller. His presence in the database linked him not to a minor infraction, but to a crime that had left a city holding its breath for decades. The contrast between the man the community knew and the truth of his actions sent shockwaves through the investigative team. For Ava, the discovery reframed everything. The focus on Harry, the boyfriend, had obscured the true perpetrator, diverting attention away from the person whose DNA now stood as undeniable evidence. The pencil, the red clay, and the meticulous archival records suddenly converged, pointing toward a reality that no one in 2001 could have anticipated. The implications were immediate and profound. A man who had seemed beyond suspicion, untouchable in the eyes of the community, was now at the center of the investigation. The weight of 20 years of assumptions, grief, and misdirected inquiry now shifted. Every report, every witness statement, every moment previously scrutinized under the wrong lens would have to be reconsidered. The calm facade of a firefighter, the trust placed in him, and the long-held suspicion of his younger brother all collided, setting the stage for revelations that would shake Tulsa to its core. The discovery of Elias Vance's DNA forced Ava Coleman to reconsider everything. For 20 years, suspicion had rested squarely on Harrison Harry Beckett, the boyfriend, whose grief had been public, sincere, and relentless. Friends, family, and the entire city had assumed he was guilty, or at the very least hiding something. Now, all those assumptions crumbled. The real perpetrator had been hiding in plain sight, shielded by reputation, familial loyalty, and the careful misdirection of 2 decades. Ava reviewed the evidence with renewed focus. The pencil, the red clay smudge, the unlocked door, and the seemingly pristine crime scene all pointed toward a presence that had been invisible to the investigators of 2001. Each overlooked clue suddenly aligned with the identity revealed by DNA. The truth was both simple and devastating. The monster everyone feared was not the obvious suspect, but the person no one had suspected at all. The tension weighed heavily. How had a respected firefighter, a pillar of the community, orchestrated a disappearance so complete that it remained unsolved for 20 years? How had the younger brother, Harry, become an unwitting accomplice in the eyes of the public, living under suspicion while the real criminal remained free? Ava understood that the breakthrough would not only solve a cold case but also confront the city with a betrayal that cut deeper than anyone had imagined. The revelation reshaped the narrative entirely. Misguided focus, assumptions, and blind trust had concealed the truth for decades. And now, with Elias Vance identified through the faintest trace of evidence, the investigation could finally begin to unravel the carefully maintained deception and bring clarity to a mystery that had haunted Tulsa for generations. Ava Coleman began assembling the pieces that, together, would form an undeniable case. The DNA from the pencil was the first cornerstone, but it was not alone. The red clay smudge, once a minor curiosity, now took on new significance, linking the bungalow to a remote location near the abandoned creek beds outside Tulsa. Every detail previously recorded: Rebecca's unlocked door, the perfectly placed sketchpad, Pippin's anxious whimpers resonated with fresh meaning. The forensic mapping, combined with the geographic specificity of the clay, painted a clear path. The trace evidence suggested movement from the bungalow to an isolated area that only someone familiar with the terrain would know. The pattern was not random. It was deliberate. Each clue, when viewed through the lens of the new DNA evidence, converged on Elias Vance. Ava revisited the original files, witness statements, and phone records. She cross-referenced them with modern findings, noting discrepancies and overlooked details. The pieces fit together in a way that had never been possible before. The timeline, the subtle environmental evidence, and the microscopic DNA trace now formed a cohesive narrative. The weight of 20 years of missed opportunities pressed upon her, yet there was clarity in the methodical assembly of facts. Each piece confirmed the others, leaving little room for doubt. The investigation was no longer speculation. It was a structured reconstruction, anchored in physical evidence and advanced forensic science. As the connections crystallized, Ava realized that the breakthrough was not just about finding a suspect. It was about exposing the full scope of deception, trust betrayed, and justice delayed. Every overlooked detail now illuminated the truth, revealing a crime meticulously hidden in plain sight, and the moment for confrontation drew near. News of Elias Vance's connection to Rebecca Miller's disappearance tore through Tulsa like a shockwave. A man trusted, admired, and respected for decades was now revealed as the central figure in a crime that had haunted the city. The realization that Harrison Harry Beckett had been living under suspicion for years only deepened the community's disbelief. Shock, outrage, and disbelief mingled in every conversation. For 2 decades, the wrong person had carried the weight of accusation, while the true perpetrator remained hidden in plain sight. The city, once comfortable with assumptions, now faced a truth far more devastating than anyone could have anticipated. Elias Vance had spent decades cultivating an image of stability, trust, and quiet heroism. In Tulsa, he was more than a retired firefighter. He was a symbol of dedication, a man whose calm presence reassured neighbors and colleagues alike. Charity drives, school fundraisers, and community safety workshops had earned him admiration. Everyone who interacted with him saw the dependable, generous figure he carefully presented to the world. His connection to Harrison Harry Beckett only reinforced that image. Harry's visible grief and public vulnerability had long drawn attention, positioning him as the central figure in the tragedy that gripped the city. Meanwhile, Elias moved in the shadows of family loyalty, his presence subtle yet ever-present. Few, if any, questioned his character. Ava Coleman understood that the community's assumptions had created a blind spot. The very qualities that had made Elias respected: his composure, his dedication, his calm authority, were the same qualities that allowed him to operate unseen. While Harry's life had been scrutinized under intense suspicion, Elias's life remained unexamined, shielded by reputation and trust. The contrast was stark. One brother living under accusation, the other silently responsible for the chaos that had haunted Tulsa for 20 years. Ava recognized that this was not merely an investigation into a crime. It was an exploration of the fragile divide between public perception and hidden reality. The respected figure, the quiet neighbor, the trusted firefighter, he was now the shadow at the center of a long-forgotten mystery. Ava's next step was clear: reconstructing every movement, every opportunity, every overlooked detail to reveal the truth lurking behind Elias Vance's composed exterior. The city had trusted him, and that trust would now be challenged in ways no one could have predicted. In 2001, the investigation had a clear, narrow focus. Harrison Harry Beckett was the obvious suspect. Rebecca Miller's boyfriend, present in her life, and publicly heartbroken. Elias Vance, despite his proximity and family connection, had never once appeared on the radar. His alibi, verified by his then-wife, placed him out of town, visiting relatives in Arkansas. It seemed airtight. Detective Calvin Thorne, despite his thoroughness, had been drawn into the immediate pressures of the case: media scrutiny, public expectation, and the emotional weight of Harry's visible grief. In that environment, assumptions took root. The focus remained on the boyfriend, whose relationship with Rebecca had been marked by tension, however minor. Elias, quiet and composed, was invisible in plain sight. The original evidence, when revisited now, tells a different story. The red clay, dismissed at the time as an oddity, was never matched to a location outside the city. The pencil, holding microscopic evidence of a male presence, had been overlooked. Even small inconsistencies in the alibi, while inconclusive in 2001, now took on new meaning. What had been considered coincidental or irrelevant was, in fact, crucial. Ava Coleman realized that the tunnel vision of the initial investigation had created a blind spot. By concentrating on Harry, the police had inadvertently shielded Elias from suspicion. The man who had lived openly, trusted by his community and family, had been able to hide behind assumptions, using reputation and alibi as a shield. For 20 years, he had operated in the shadows, untouched, while the public and the police focused on the wrong person. The oversight was not a failure of effort, but a reflection of human nature. The obvious suspect is always easier to examine, while the quiet, respected man in the background escapes notice. Ava Coleman set to work reconstructing the night of August 24, 2001, with a precision that the original investigation could not achieve. Every phone call, every location, every minor detail was reviewed, cross-referenced, and mapped against known evidence. She traced movements, considering not just who was present, but who could have had access to Rebecca Miller's bungalow, and when. The red clay smudge, previously treated as a minor curiosity, became central. Its unique composition linked directly to a specific area, a disused fire department worksite, familiar only to those who had operated there. Ava noted the alignment between the clay and the timeline. Someone would have needed detailed knowledge of the terrain and access to navigate it without leaving a trace. Elias Vance fit that profile perfectly. By examining his known whereabouts, the team identified gaps in his alibi. Though verified by family, the new forensic connections made these periods critical. Cross-referencing witness statements and vehicle records, Ava began to see a coherent pattern emerging, a presence that was invisible to the casual observer, but evident through careful analysis. Each step of the timeline brought Elias closer to the bungalow at the precise window when Rebecca vanished. This reconstruction illuminated the methodical nature of the act. The entry into the home, the absence of struggle, and the subsequent disposal of evidence were no longer random or inexplicable. They formed a deliberate sequence of actions, executed by someone familiar with both the environment and the people involved. The realization weighed heavily. For 2 decades, the story had been told in fragments, assumptions, and misdirected suspicion. Now, with the timeline reconstructed, the truth began to assert itself. The quiet, respected firefighter had moved through that night with calculated intention, unseen, yet undeniable. The red clay, once dismissed as a minor anomaly, now carried the weight of revelation. Ava Coleman had traced its composition to a specific location, a disused fire department worksite, familiar only to personnel who had worked there extensively. Its presence in Rebecca Miller's bungalow was no coincidence. Each speck told a story of movement, access, and presence of someone who knew the terrain intimately. Ava mapped the clay's origins against Elias Vance's known patterns, noting his decades of service at the department. The connection was undeniable. Only someone with familiarity of the site could have traveled between locations, inadvertently carrying the clay into the home. It was an unintentional signature, a microscopic footprint of the perpetrator's passage. The implications were staggering. The seemingly ordinary smudge on the polished floor now tied Elias directly to the night of Rebecca's disappearance. It explained previously baffling elements: the lack of forced entry, the absence of struggle, and the eerie precision with which the crime had been executed. The clay bridged gaps that no witness or alibi could fill, transforming a minor detail into a decisive clue. For Ava, the revelation underscored a painful truth. Critical evidence could remain hidden for decades, overlooked simply because it did not fit the narrative investigators expected. The red clay had been there all along, a silent witness to the crime, waiting for the tools and perspective capable of interpreting it. People always forget to subscribe, so here's a quick reminder before we continue. As the timeline and the clay were fully aligned, the reality became clear. Elias Vance had been in the right place, at the right time, with knowledge, means, and motive to commit the act. The quiet, respected man at the center of the community had finally been illuminated by the smallest, yet most telling, pieces of evidence. Despite the mounting evidence, one question lingered. Why had Elias Vance remained invisible for so long? His reputation as a dependable firefighter and a devoted community member had created a protective shield. People trusted him, assumed his innocence, and interpreted his calm demeanor as proof of integrity. Yet, that very trust had allowed deception to flourish in plain sight. Ava Coleman noted the patterns of silence surrounding Elias. In 2001, every lead pointed toward Harrison Beckett, whose visibility and emotional reactions made him the obvious target. Elias, by contrast, had cultivated an aura of reliability and consistency. He spoke little, engaged with the community selectively, and maintained a controlled routine that left no glaring gaps. The absence of attention had become his unspoken alibi. The red clay's trace, when combined with the reconstructed timeline, revealed the quiet movements of a calculated presence. The smudge on the polished wood was not just a piece of soil, it was a silent signature of someone who had entered the bungalow, confronted Rebecca, and left with devastating consequences. This evidence illuminated what the world had failed to notice for 20 years: the shadow behind the public figure, orchestrating actions hidden in plain sight. Ava reflected on the danger of assumptions. Reputation, appearances, and preconceptions had misled an entire city and stalled justice for decades. The protective veneer of trust had concealed the truth, turning the investigation toward the wrong target. It was a harsh reminder that the most devastating threats can reside in the most familiar places. With the timeline, clay evidence, and behavioral patterns aligned, Ava was ready to confront the final truth. The silent presence that had shaped 2 decades of grief was now fully exposed, poised for the reckoning that the city and Rebecca's memory deserved. The room was tense, every silence stretching into its own kind of pressure. Detective Ava Coleman laid the evidence before Elias Vance with precise calm. The LT-DNA results from the pencil, linking him to Rebecca Miller, rested in a folder across from him. Beside it, the geological report detailing the red clay's unique origin made the connection undeniable. Elias maintained his composed exterior at first. His voice was measured, almost rehearsed, as he suggested coincidence, that the DNA might have transferred through a shared family connection, or that the clay could have come from some mundane source. He insisted he had nothing to do with Rebecca's disappearance. But Ava did not waver. She presented the timeline reconstruction, the careful mapping of his movements, and the specificity of the clay's origin. Each fact, each microscopic trace, cornered him incrementally. The calmness in the room began to fracture, small signs emerging, micro-expressions, a tightening jaw, a flicker of avoidance. Every denial met with corroborating evidence chipped away at his defenses. Ava's voice remained steady, yet unrelenting. The combination of DNA, geography, and opportunity left no room for plausible deniability. The silence grew heavier, punctuated only by the soft shuffle of papers and the barely audible ticking of the clock. Elias's eyes betrayed the first cracks in his facade. The meticulous composure that had shielded him for decades faltered. He shifted in his seat, a subtle tension in his shoulders. A brief downward glance. The room seemed to constrict around him. The evidence was no longer abstract. It was tangible, inescapable, closing in on a truth he could no longer avoid. For the first time, the quiet, respected firefighter faced the reality he had managed to evade for 20 years. The confrontation was no longer a debate. It was a reckoning. The shadow of his actions had finally been illuminated. The initial calm Elias displayed was slowly dissolving. Each piece of evidence Ava presented tiny DNA traces. The red clay's unmistakable origin, the reconstructed timeline worked together like a vice, tightening around him. His measured voice faltered at times, revealing hesitation that had never surfaced in 20 years. He shifted uneasily, avoiding direct eye contact. Small gestures, clasping his hands too tightly, tapping his fingers against the table, betrayed a growing internal conflict. Ava watched quietly, allowing the weight of the evidence to press down, knowing the truth would emerge not from force, but from the cracks in his composure. Elias's denials became fragmented. Words that had once been confident and steady now trailed into stammered attempts to rationalize. It's not what it looks like, he muttered. He suggested coincidences, improbable explanations, anything to create distance from the inescapable facts. The psychological tension was palpable. Ava pressed on carefully, asking questions that forced him to address the evidence directly, to confront the implications of his own movements that night. Every answer he gave, every pause, only tightened the circle. The more he spoke, the clearer it became. The truth was surfacing, unstoppable, unavoidable. Gradually, the realization dawned fully. Elias understood that the web of denial he had relied on for decades was collapsing. The meticulously controlled life, the reputation that shielded him, and the assumptions of those around him could no longer obscure his involvement. By the end of the session, the quiet room held the weight of an impending confession. The calm veneer had been stripped away, replaced by a man confronted with the undeniable reality of his actions. The unraveling had begun, and the silence that had protected him for 20 years was breaking, inch by inch, under the relentless presence of truth. Elias's defenses began to crumble as Ava guided him through the timeline of that night. The first admission was tentative, almost whispered, but it carried the weight of decades of hidden truth. He recounted entering Rebecca's bungalow with the key his brother had provided, intending only to confront her about her relationship with Harry. What followed was a brief, tense confrontation that escalated unexpectedly. Rebecca, fiercely independent and unwilling to be coerced, resisted his attempts to control her. Elias described the struggle in stark terms: the shoving, the sudden loss of balance, the overwhelming force he used to subdue her. Each movement, each decision, was recounted with chilling clarity, revealing the desperate escalation from confrontation to fatal outcome. He admitted to overpowering her, realizing too late that the encounter would end in tragedy. The panic that followed was immediate and consuming. Every thought turned to concealment, to preventing discovery. He explained how he transported her body to a remote, abandoned creek near the fire department worksite, a location he knew well. The red clay that had appeared at her bungalow had originated from this very site, carried inadvertently in the chaos of that night. Ava listened intently, noting every detail, every hesitation, understanding the sequence of events that had remained a mystery for 20 years. Elias's account of the disposal, the meticulous cleaning, and the return to normalcy afterward highlighted the chilling precision with which he had attempted to erase his presence. For the first time, the full gravity of Rebecca Miller's fate was articulated not through speculation or conjecture, but from the man who had committed the act. The struggle, the fear, and the tragic consequence were no longer theoretical. They were painfully real, delivered in his own voice. The revelation of Elias's actions brought another truth to light: Harrison Beckett's reluctant involvement. Elias admitted that Harry had not been part of the murder itself, yet he had become an unwilling accomplice the following morning. When Harry discovered the evidence of his brother's crime, he was confronted with an impossible choice. Harry's decision was born from fear and familial loyalty. He understood the devastating impact the truth could have on Elias's life and reputation, and on his own as well. Confronted with the situation, Harry chose silence, allowing suspicion to continue falling on himself, while his brother remained hidden in plain sight. The emotional burden of this choice weighed heavily on him for decades, a secret that haunted every interview, every media appearance, and every public gesture. Ava Coleman examined Harry's actions with careful consideration. His complicity had been subtle. He had provided no direct assistance in the act, but his decision to maintain an alibi and avoid revealing the truth had prolonged Rebecca's disappearance and the suffering of those who loved her. The moral complexity of his involvement contrasted sharply with the calculated violence of Elias, highlighting the tangled web of loyalty, fear, and consequence that had allowed the crime to remain hidden. The confession illuminated the personal toll on Harry. For 20 years, he had lived under suspicion, bearing the community's scrutiny and media speculation. His grief, guilt, and fear were compounded by the knowledge that his brother had been the true perpetrator. The revelation brought both relief and devastation. The truth was finally known, yet it carried the weight of betrayal and anguish that would linger indefinitely. The narrative of the crime was no longer one of simple guilt. It was a story of human frailty, moral compromise, and the far-reaching consequences of choices made in fear. The confession left a city reeling. Tulsa, once lulled into forgetting, now faced the full scope of decades-long deception. Rebecca Miller's disappearance was no longer an unresolved mystery but a tragic narrative of obsession, misjudgment, and hidden betrayal. Detective Ava Coleman reflected on the fragile assumptions that had guided the investigation, realizing how easily appearances can mislead and protect the guilty. For Danica Wells, for Harrison, and for the community, the silence had ended. The truth, as painful as it was, finally demanded acknowledgement, and with it came the long overdue weight of justice. The news of Elias Vance's arrest spread through Tulsa like a thunderclap. The man who had been seen as a pillar of the community, a firefighter, a respected figure, a model citizen, was revealed as the orchestrator of a decades-old tragedy. Streets once familiar now felt alien, as neighbors struggled to reconcile the image of a trusted man with the horrifying truth of his actions. Whispers grew into conversations, and conversations grew into heated debates. Families gathered in living rooms and coffee shops, discussing how someone so seemingly ordinary could harbor such darkness. Shock gave way to anger, anger to grief. Parents worried about the hidden dangers in the people they relied upon, friends questioned every interaction, and colleagues of Elias silently revisited years of memories, searching for clues they had never noticed. For some, disbelief was nearly unbearable. Community members replayed past encounters in their minds. Friendly gestures, public acts of charity, smiles that had now taken on a sinister retrospect. The contrast between appearance and reality weighed heavily on everyone, leaving an unsettling tension in the air. Even for those who had long suspected Harry Beckett, the revelation of Elias's involvement upended everything. Misplaced suspicion, years of speculation, and the public's collective misunderstanding now collided with the truth, forcing a city to confront the uncomfortable reality that evil can wear a familiar face. In homes and workplaces across Tulsa, the emotional fallout was tangible. People spoke of betrayal, of loss, of the fragility of trust. The city had loved, respected, and relied upon a man whose actions had shattered lives, not only of the victims but of those caught in the shadow of suspicion. Tulsa would not forget, and the emotional tremors would echo for years to come. News outlets descended on Tulsa with relentless intensity. Television cameras, newspapers, and online platforms broadcast the revelation of Elias Vance's arrest across the city and beyond. Headlines screamed betrayal, and social media buzzed with shock, outrage, and disbelief. The quiet, dependable firefighter had become a symbol of hidden danger, and the story dominated every conversation. Reporters sifted through public records, past interviews, and archived footage, reconstructing the narrative for an audience eager to understand how such a respected figure had committed an unthinkable act. Community members were interviewed, their voices trembling as they recounted memories of Elias's public service, his calm demeanor, and the trust they had placed in him for years. Every recounting seemed to deepen the collective sense of betrayal, making the tragedy feel impossibly immediate. Debates erupted in comment sections, at workplaces, and in homes. Some argued about the failures of initial investigations, questioning how the crime had gone unnoticed for so long. Others focused on Harry Beckett, now revealed as a reluctant accomplice, discussing morality, loyalty, and the human instinct to protect family, even at immense personal cost. The media coverage amplified these emotions, forcing the city to face both the crime and the consequences of suspicion, trust, and concealment. For Tulsa, the story was not only about a decades-old disappearance finally solved, it was a reflection on community, perception, and the fragile boundaries between respect and deception. Every report, every live update, every article invited the public to reassess their understanding of safety, justice, and human nature. In the glare of national attention, Tulsa's collective shock was magnified, creating a citywide reckoning with a truth that had remained hidden for 20 years. For Harrison Beckett, the revelation of Elias's guilt was both relief and torment. 20 years of suspicion, whispers, and public scrutiny had weighed heavily on him, shaping every interaction, every public appearance, and every personal decision. The man who had once been vilified for a crime he did not commit now faced the reality that the true perpetrator had been closer than anyone imagined. Relief was immediate, but it was accompanied by guilt. Harrison had remained silent to protect his brother, complicit in the preservation of a secret that had stolen his peace of mind. The media, neighbors, and friends had long assumed his involvement, and those assumptions had inflicted silent wounds that would not vanish overnight. The years of false blame had left a residue of shame, one that mingled uncomfortably with the newfound truth. Harrison's reflections were painful yet revealing. He considered the choices he had made: loyalty to family versus transparency, fear of scandal versus the pursuit of justice. He acknowledged the subtle torment of living under suspicion, the anxiety that accompanied every encounter, and the quiet isolation that comes from knowing the truth alone. The community's reaction, however, offered a complex relief. Support mingled with lingering questions, understanding intertwined with skepticism. Harrison had endured an emotional crucible, and the public's reevaluation of his role marked the first tentative steps toward healing. Yet the scars of decades under the shadow of blame would remain, a lasting testament to the power of assumptions and the enduring consequences of moral compromise. Harrison's journey highlighted a painful reality. The ripple effects of crime extend far beyond the victim and the perpetrator, touching the lives of all those caught in the orbit of suspicion, loyalty, and human frailty. The revelation left the city with questions that could not be easily answered. How well do we truly know those we trust? How often do appearances hide truths we dare not confront? Tulsa had witnessed the collapse of its assumptions, the shattering of trust, and the painful reminder that evil can exist where it is least expected. Now, the community was left to reflect, to discuss, and to reconcile their feelings of shock and betrayal. What would you do if someone you trusted was capable of this? For Danica Wells, every quiet moment in the years after Rebecca's disappearance carried a weight that no one else could see. The apartment they had shared seemed to hold echoes of a life frozen in time: an unfinished sketchpad, a Dalmatian still waiting for her owner, and the locked rooms of memory that refused to let go. The silence was suffocating, a constant reminder of a friend taken without explanation, a presence erased yet impossibly present. She had endured the subtle judgments of neighbors, the whispered suspicions of acquaintances, and the relentless curiosity of the media, all of which painted her as a witness, a confidant, and, at times, an unwitting accomplice in the imagination of others. Every unanswered question gnawed at her, a persistent ache that refused to dissipate. The fear of never knowing what truly happened to Rebecca followed her through every season, every minor success, every day she tried to move forward. Danica had learned patience the hard way. She had held vigil in her own mind, replaying the last night they spent together, analyzing every conversation, every laugh, every disagreement. Hope and despair intertwined, shaping a quiet resilience born not from choice, but necessity. Every phone call, every media update, every rumor was a test of endurance, and she bore it with a steadfast determination to honor Rebecca's life. And yet, despite the years, the heartbreak, and the uncertainty, Danica never stopped believing that one day, the truth would emerge. That belief, fragile yet unyielding, was the silent companion that had kept her going through 2 decades of unanswered questions, whispered doubts, and nights spent wondering if closure would ever come. The day Danica learned the truth was a day of conflicting emotions. For 20 years, she had carried the weight of uncertainty, replaying every moment of Rebecca's final hours in her mind. The news of Elias Vance's arrest tore open old wounds, yet it also offered a strange, long-awaited relief. The man who had been invisible to suspicion for decades, the one hiding in plain sight, was finally accountable. Shock came first. It was a disbelief that shook her to the core. The idea that someone so trusted, so seemingly ordinary, could commit such an unthinkable act was almost impossible to process. Memories of Rebecca's laughter, her energy, and her bright spirit clashed violently with the knowledge of what had been done to her. The relief that justice was finally within reach was tangled with sorrow, with the undeniable pain of remembering the years spent waiting for answers that had seemed forever out of reach. As Danica absorbed the details, she confronted the painful realization that her assumptions had been misdirected. Harrison Beckett, long suspected and publicly scrutinized, was not the villain she had feared. Instead, the shadow that had haunted the disappearance for decades was someone else entirely, someone who had exploited family loyalty and trust to hide a terrible truth. The revelation reshaped her understanding of the past, forcing her to reconcile grief with clarity, anger with relief, and memory with justice. In that moment, Danica experienced the strange power of closure, a bittersweet convergence of truth and emotion. The years of waiting, questioning, and fearing were finally met with resolution. The silence that had once mocked her patience was broken, replaced by the knowledge that Rebecca's story, long suspended in uncertainty, was now complete. With the truth finally revealed, Danica felt a heavy weight lift from her shoulders, though the emotional aftermath was far from simple. Justice, long delayed, had been delivered. Elias Vance, the hidden hand behind Rebecca's disappearance, was held accountable, and the decades of unanswered questions were finally met with resolution. Relief mingled with sorrow, grief intertwined with satisfaction, and the long shadow that had haunted her every thought began to dissipate. The vindication extended beyond legal terms. For years, Danica had silently carried the burden of suspicion, fear, and doubt. Now, that burden was shared, lifted by the clarity of truth. Harrison Beckett, wrongly suspected, could finally reclaim his life without the oppressive weight of public assumption. The emotional healing that followed was subtle yet profound, a quiet acknowledgement that patience, endurance, and hope could withstand even the longest periods of uncertainty. Danica reflected on the resilience required to endure 20 years of unanswered questions. Each passing day had tested her ability to hold on to memory, to honor Rebecca's spirit, and to maintain faith that the truth would emerge. The emotional journey was not just about Rebecca, but about the strength of human perseverance in the face of incomprehensible loss. Justice, in this sense, was both concrete and intangible. It existed in the courtroom, in the arrest, and in the acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Yet it also lived in the hearts of those who had waited, who had mourned, and who had refused to let time erase the importance of a life stolen too soon. For Danica, the sense of vindication was not a triumphant celebration, but a solemn, deeply personal affirmation that Rebecca's life mattered, and that the truth, however delayed, could finally set things right. Danica's journey through grief, hope, and ultimate clarity left her transformed. The silence that had shadowed her life was finally broken, replaced by understanding and closure. She honored Rebecca's memory not just through sorrow, but through the steadfast patience and courage that had carried her across 2 decades of uncertainty. The truth, long hidden, allowed her heart to reconcile loss with justice. In the quiet aftermath, Danica realized that the endurance of hope, the refusal to surrender to despair, and the pursuit of truth could restore not only justice, but the dignity of those left behind. In Tulsa, Elias Vance was the embodiment of trust. A retired firefighter, a respected community figure, a man whose calm demeanor inspired confidence he had all the markings of someone beyond reproach. For 20 years, neighbors, friends, and colleagues had counted on his integrity, never suspecting that behind the steady exterior lay a capacity for betrayal that none could have imagined. The very qualities that made him reliable also masked the truth, creating a deceptive calm that lulled everyone into a false sense of security. Meanwhile, Harrison Beckett, who bore the brunt of suspicion for decades, endured whispers and judgment from a community misled by appearances. The shock of discovering that the real threat had been someone quietly trusted all along taught a lesson that extended far beyond this single tragedy. Reality is rarely as simple as it seems. It is easy to misjudge, to assign blame based on visible signs, to assume that those who are quiet, composed, and seemingly ordinary cannot harbor dark secrets. The first lesson from this case is stark. Never accept appearances at face value. Trust must be earned, and assumptions can be dangerous. Vigilance, attention to inconsistencies, and questioning what seems normal are crucial tools for navigating a world where deception often hides behind the familiar. For every community, for every family, the story of Rebecca Miller serves as a reminder that calm exteriors can conceal chaos, and that understanding the truth, often requires patience, courage, and a willingness to look beyond what is immediately visible. Even in everyday life, small details ignored or overlooked can reveal realities that change everything. The deceptive calm that Elias presented for years was a masterclass in masking intent, a warning for anyone who might mistake comfort and familiarity for safety. 2 decades of uncertainty could have broken anyone, yet both Detective Ava Coleman and Danica Wells demonstrated the power of persistence. For Danica, each day without answers was a test of endurance. She lived with the absence of Rebecca's laughter, the unspoken questions, and the gnawing sense that justice might never arrive. Instead of surrendering to despair, she carried the weight quietly, allowing hope to exist alongside grief, an invisible strength that refused to waver. Detective Coleman, arriving years after the initial investigation had stalled, exemplified methodical determination. She approached the cold case with patience and discipline, reviewing old files, reevaluating overlooked evidence, and trusting that the truth could still be uncovered. Every discarded lead and forgotten detail became a potential key, and through unwavering focus, she transformed what seemed like decades of failure into a breakthrough. Their journeys illustrate a critical lesson. Persistence is not glamorous, and it is rarely noticed in real time. It is quiet, sometimes grueling work, marked by long stretches of waiting, questioning, and incremental progress. Yet, this relentless commitment can overturn assumptions, reveal hidden truths, and restore justice long after it seemed impossible. In life, as in this case, the most important victories often come not from immediate success, but from refusing to abandon the pursuit of truth. Coleman and Danica remind us that, even when the world moves on, silence does not equal defeat. Persistence, patience, and unwavering belief in what is right are powerful forces that can transform the impossible into reality, proving that endurance, even in isolation, has the power to uncover what others have long forgotten. In the Rebecca Miller case, justice hinged on the smallest of details. A faint smudge of red clay on the hallway floor, overlooked for years, became a pivotal clue. The pencil resting beside her unfinished sketch, touched by the hands of the perpetrator, held invisible traces that modern science could finally decode. These tiny fragments, nearly dismissed as inconsequential, ultimately shattered decades of false assumptions and revealed the truth hidden in plain sight. Attention to detail is not just a tool for investigators, it is a lesson for all who seek clarity in complex situations. Often, the elements that seem insignificant are the ones that carry the most weight. The red clay was not dramatic, the pencil was ordinary, yet their combination exposed the carefully constructed illusion that had protected Elias Vance for 20 years. This case underscores the importance of meticulous observation and curiosity. Progress does not always arrive in large, obvious bursts. Instead, it is often a series of small, deliberate steps, a careful reading of evidence, and the patience to notice what others ignore. Each minor detail carries the potential to shift the narrative, challenge assumptions, and guide decisions toward truth and justice. For those who reflect on this story, the takeaway is clear. Never underestimate the impact of what appears trivial. Whether in investigations, personal choices, or daily life, small observations, persistent inquiry, and careful attention can uncover reality in ways that force even the most confident assumptions to be reevaluated. The smallest clue can ignite the greatest revelation, and in Rebecca's story, that revelation changed everything. Justice in the Rebecca Miller case was not swift, and it was not easy. 20 years had passed, filled with uncertainty, suspicion, and grief. Yet the eventual resolution proved that determination, moral courage, and the refusal to accept incomplete answers can overcome even the most entrenched obstacles. Detective Coleman's methodical work and Danica's unwavering patience culminated in a breakthrough that reaffirmed a fundamental truth. Justice may be delayed, but it is never powerless when pursued with resolve. The lessons extend beyond law enforcement. In life, challenges can appear insurmountable, and setbacks can feel permanent. Yet this story demonstrates that persistent effort, combined with careful observation and steadfast belief in what is right, can transform despair into resolution. Every overlooked detail, every moment of quiet dedication, contributed to dismantling the illusion that had shielded wrongdoing. The power of consistency, rigor, and moral conviction can eventually illuminate even the darkest corners of uncertainty. For communities and individuals alike, the narrative emphasizes vigilance and integrity. The public may misjudge, circumstances may cloud perception, and the apparent truth may be deceptive. But those who commit to seeking clarity, who refuse to let time erase accountability, can uncover outcomes that restore fairness and deliver long overdue closure. As a reminder, this pursuit of justice is ongoing. Every case, every story, offers lessons that extend into our own decisions, interactions, and awareness. Subscribing ensures that these insights, drawn from real experiences and their dramatic resolution, remain accessible, guiding us to recognize the small signs, act with courage, and honor the enduring value of truth. 20 years is a long time to live with unanswered questions. For the community of Tulsa, life moved forward. The bungalow in Kendall Whittier changed hands. Neighbors came and went, and the headlines faded. Yet, for Danica Wells and those closest to Rebecca Miller, each day was a reminder of absence, a persistent echo of loss that refused to be quieted. The silence was heavy, filled with the weight of what could not be explained, the gnawing uncertainty of why someone so vibrant and full of life simply disappeared. Even Detective Thorne, now retired, carried fragments of the case in his memory. The open sketchpad, the pencil resting where it had been left, and the whimpering Dalmatian haunted him in ways the public never saw. The world outside moved on, unaware of the subtle tension that had gripped the hearts of a few who had loved, protected, and searched tirelessly. The slow erosion of hope and the creeping doubts tested everyone's resilience, as if time itself was an adversary, threatening to bury the truth beneath years of forgetfulness. It is a reminder that loss is not measured by what the world remembers, but by what the heart cannot forget. Every anniversary, every familiar scent or sound, connected them to Rebecca in ways no passing years could diminish. The unbroken bond of memory, the quiet vigilance, and the enduring commitment to justice held them together. And even now, as the story draws toward its conclusion, one question lingers, pulling at the edges of understanding. How can a community, a family, and friends endure so long under the shadow of uncertainty, holding on to fragments of truth while time seems to conspire against them? The answer lies in patience, perseverance, and the quiet courage of those who refuse to let silence win. After 20 long years, the truth finally emerged, shattering assumptions and rewriting the story Tulsa thought it knew. Elias Vance, the quiet, respected figure who had gone unnoticed in the original investigation, was confronted with irrefutable evidence. The DNA from the pencil and the red clay traced back to him, leaving no room for doubt. The arrest brought a complex wave of emotions: relief, disbelief, and a long-awaited sense of closure for those who had never stopped seeking answers. For Harrison Beckett, the weight lifted almost immediately. 2 decades of suspicion, whispered conversations, and the heavy burden of being the presumed suspect evaporated as the real story unfolded. Relief mingled with sorrow, a reminder that even innocence can be shadowed by deceit and fear. The emotional toll, carried quietly for years, finally found a release, though the scars of accusation could never be fully erased. Danica Wells, who had lived with the absence of her closest friend, felt the tension of waiting dissolve. The relentless silence was broken, replaced by the clarity of resolution. Justice, delayed but not denied, illuminated the painstaking work of Detective Ava Coleman and the perseverance that had refused to let the case fade into obscurity. The community, once confused and misled, now faced the stark reality. Appearances can deceive, and those trusted most can harbor secrets beyond imagination. But in this revelation lay the ultimate payoff. The truth that had remained buried in the shadows for 20 years, finally brought into the light. The long arc of patience, meticulous work, and unwavering belief in justice had reached its climax, leaving a community, a family, and a friend with answers they had yearned for, and a measure of peace they had never thought possible. Rebecca Miller's life was never defined by her disappearance, though for 20 years, that absence overshadowed the memory of who she truly was. She was an artist, a friend, a force of energy in her community, leaving traces of her spirit in every sketch, every bold stroke of color, and every act of kindness shared with those around her. Honoring her memory means remembering the vibrancy she brought to the world, not just the tragedy that ended it. For Danica Wells and Rebecca's loved ones, the recovery of the truth allowed them to celebrate her life in ways long deferred. The grief that had silently threaded through 2 decades of waiting transformed into remembrance, an acknowledgement of the joy, creativity, and independence Rebecca embodied. Candles were lit, stories retold, and quiet reflections offered a measure of healing, proving that even the darkest chapters can be followed by light. The community, too, grappled with this duality: shock at the betrayal by someone trusted and relief that justice had finally arrived. In honoring Rebecca, the narrative shifted from one of suspicion and loss to one of remembrance and respect. Schools, friends, and local art circles recalled her passion and dedication, ensuring her spirit remained alive in the spaces she had once inhabited. This moment underscores a universal truth: the measure of a life is not its end, but its impact. Rebecca's creativity, courage, and individuality continue to resonate, teaching those left behind to cherish those they love, to pursue their passions, and to hold on to hope even when answers seem impossible. In celebrating her memory, the community embraces the fullness of who she was, ensuring that Rebecca Miller is remembered not as a victim of tragedy, but as a woman whose light endured beyond the shadows of her disappearance. As the final pieces of Rebecca Miller's story fall into place, the lingering lessons echo far beyond Tulsa's streets. Time cannot erase the need for vigilance, patience, and the courage to question what seems unquestionable. Even the most respected figures can hide secrets, and the seemingly ordinary can carry extraordinary consequences. The truth, once uncovered, serves as both a warning and a guide, reminding us to remain attentive to the details that matter, and to trust our instincts when something feels amiss. The story also illuminates the power of persistence. Detective Ava Coleman's commitment, built on fresh perspective and state-of-the-art forensic advances, shows that progress is possible even when hope appears lost. Justice may be delayed, but deliberate effort, sharp observation, and unwavering determination can dismantle the illusions that protect wrongdoing. Those who refuse to surrender to despair demonstrate that even long-forgotten cases can find resolution. For friends, family, and communities, the narrative offers a reminder to honor memory while seeking accountability. Grief, patience, and resilience are not wasted. They are instruments in uncovering the truth and restoring balance to lives disrupted by injustice. Rebecca's story teaches that acknowledgement, reflection, and careful attention to reality can reveal clarity where confusion once ruled. And as we conclude this chapter, don't miss the next shocking revelation. Subscribe now. Each case holds lessons, truths, and stories that matter, waiting to be uncovered and understood. Let Rebecca Miller's journey remain a guiding example. Never ignore the small signs. Trust your convictions, and recognize that justice, when pursued relentlessly, can outlast even decades of silence.